Today, we're going to talk about video games, and in particular, we're going to talk about my favorite video games from being a kid until now. And I want to start this one off strong with a little game called BioShock, because BioShock was really my first true single player game that I played that had an incredible story. Before that, I was playing games like Roller Coaster Tycoon, Zoo Tycoon, The Sims. I played a lot of sports games growing up, Mario Kart, Mario Party, Pokemon, stuff like that. But I really never truly experienced a single player game for some reason until BioShock came out. And that was one of the first single player games, if not the first one, that I really truly experienced and played from start to finish. And I actually remember how I heard of BioShock. Me and a group of friends were in an Xbox 360 party chat. If you remember those, we're getting old. But we were all playing Call of Duty 4, World at War, Battlefield. We were playing some type of first-person shooter, and we were trying to get one of my friends into the lobby to play with us. And he said, no, man, I just bought this new game, BioShock, and it's insane. It's crazy. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And at the time, I was just like, why would you want to play a single player game and not play this with your friends? You know, we're over here having fun. We're getting kill streaks. We're killing other kids from across the world. I didn't understand it. And I just remember later on going to GameStop for some reason, you know, just checking out other games and seeing BioShock on the shelf. And I'm like, you know what? I'm here to pick up a video game. You know, I had some extra cash at 13, 14 years old. Let's see what this game is all about. So I picked it up. I think it was on discount already because it has been like a year or two since the game launched. And I popped it in to my Xbox 360 and I was just absolutely blown away. Immediately, you start off in an airplane. You know, mom, dad, you were right. It's like it had the 1950s or 60s setting, and the game starts off in a plane crash. You were literally in a plane crash, and then you just wake back up. You're underwater. You are surrounded by, once you get to the surface, you are surrounded by fire, and you can see the plane in the background start to sink into the ocean. And then you just see this lighthouse light up out of nowhere, middle of the ocean. So the game literally grabs your attention immediately. And I didn't have any idea what to expect from BioShock. I just remember being kind of like on the edge of my seat a little bit, because whenever you go down into the bathysphere for the very first time and you get a call on the radio, you have the splicer kind of trying to get into your bathysphere, I didn't know what to expect. So to me, the first like 10 minutes of the game was just a pure horror game. And of course, I hate horror games. I love horror movies, but I, for some reason, just cannot deal with horror games. Being the person that is taking control of the character, just couldn't do it. It freaked me out. Couldn't do it. But yeah, BioShock is a game that I probably play at least once a year. And it just will go down for me as the game that got me into single player games truly. And BioShock 2 to me wasn't as good. BioShock 3, I thought at first I didn't enjoy BioShock Infinite because it wasn't in Rapture. And then I slowly just more and more fell in love with the game. And it was, from what I remember, pretty astronomically longer than BioShock 1 and 2, maybe even by like double the length if you did all the extra side stuff. But I just remember how good of a game BioShock was, and it's a game that will always stick with me. And I'm really glad that they did the remastered version of it, because although the gameplay, even to this day, is still, well, not even to this day, seems a little bit outdated, the remastered version completely like overhauled the graphics. It looks really, really good. But the puzzles and the mechanics, and there are some things about it that still do, or that do feel outdated. I don't know why I keep saying still, but it's just crazy to me when I look back and realize that that game is like 16, 17, 18 years old at this point. It's coming up on 20 years old, which is just so insane to think about with how games were 20 years ago. And the fact that BioShock can still hold up to this day and you can still play it, and it feels like a new experience because of how different it is. And no other game has really grasped me like the intro of BioShock did. It was so good. So the next game I would have to say is probably Dead Space. And these are in no particular order, but Dead Space had me hooked immediately. It was kind of like BioShock, where you just stumble into, well, not really stumble, but you're going to check on the Ishimura, and you just see this massive spaceship in the middle of space. And it just, the visuals of Dead Space and the way that they use sound design and lighting in the environment is nothing. It kind of took me back to the BioShock days, which was like a year before this, I think 2 years before this, where it used the environment to really just like grab you and hold you in. And I just loved, I was always a cinematic gamer growing up, meaning I loved realism. I was never really into Mario Party or, Donkey Kong, Zelda. I was never really into that. I loved the more real world aspects of video games and sound design and visuals and how good graphics were. That's really what grabbed me, even starting as a kid. That's why I loved games like Zoo Tycoon and Roller Coaster Tycoon. I loved Age of the Empires just because it felt real, and just something about it really had me hooked. But Dead Space, just from the beginning of being an engineer, not really someone that was this battle-hardened warrior, you are stuck on this ship, you're trying to find the way out, and you just are becoming more and more of a badass as you go through the game. And oh, it was so good. Again, just the different kind of weapons and shooting enemies' limbs off, and just really not knowing what was going to be around the next corner is something that's always going to stick with me. And like BioShock, it's a game that I just continuously have to go back to. Okay, so I want to take a step back and go more towards the RPG aspects of things, because there was one RPG in particular that got me into RPGs, and that was a little game called The Elder Scrolls Oblivion. Before Skyrim, there was the beautiful Oblivion. And strangely enough, what got me into this game was the fact that I had the big collector's edition guide also. So I know that that sounds really silly, but I just remember being like at my desk, or like I think at that time I may have had like a couch in my room with a coffee table, and I just remember having this big book on the table spread out, and I'm sitting there playing the game and just amazed at everything you could do. But I think having the collector's edition like big book just made me feel like I had this book. It was here for me on this adventure. I felt like I was just going on like this big giant quest myself. And at the time, Oblivion to me looked amazing. It was like whimsical, it was bright, and it was colorful. You know, it was very oversaturated with the greens and the blues. And just, it was really truly my first RPG experience where you could just, you got out of the prison and the world was yours. You could go and do whatever you wanted to. The fact that you could just go and kill random people, and there's all these different guilds and these crazy quests with this big hell like Eye of Sauron type of gate that you had to go through and close. And man, I was just so blown away by Oblivion, because there was the character customization, there was getting rewards like swords and armor for quest, and, you know, killing a boss or an enemy and taking their gear and then going to sell it at a market. I've never played anything like it before. There was stealing horses, or you could buy your own horses. And man, I missed that game so much. And I remember beating it fairly quickly despite how long the game was, because I was just so hooked in it. And I just, it brings back so many good memories. The music in that game, going through a forest or a cave, and just the dun, 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 like the magical music in the background, and how good the game looked at night going through a forest even back then. It just, there was something truly magical about Oblivion that really nothing after that in that genre, at least, or in that form, because the next two games I'm gonna say really did grab a hold of me and gave me a whole new experience that I've never had before, even though they were in the same category. So we're gonna continue off of Oblivion, because there was a little game, and I'm gonna go back to Oblivion in some way, but Fable 2. Oh, Fable 2 brought me back. And Fable 2 was actually the very first game ever, and still to this day, of that length that I beat in one sitting. I was completely addicted to Fable 2. I think I played it for literally 16 or 17 hours straight to get through the game. And that was like before the DLC. That was before anything else that added some extra hours to it. But I don't know why, but I got into games late for some reason. But I mean, I was also 15 and 16 when these games came out, so I didn't have a ton of money to spend on video games. And again, I was a very, very big multiplayer whenever these games came out, so I kind of missed them. And then every now and then throughout the year, I would go and buy a single player game. But Fable 2 to me was just so magical. Even from the moment you go to the title screen, it's that little voice, and so our story begins. And I was like, oh, what am I about to get into? And just, you know, it just had this weird sense of humor to it, the way that you could get married. And I did not play Fable 1 before this. And I know people say Fable 1 is way better than Fable 2, and then Fable 2 is better than Fable 3. But Fable 2, just the fact that you could get married, you could buy a bunch of property, you could go and meet and trade with other players, and their little like each player, if you saw them in a town hall or something, had like a little icon above them, so you could see actual players run through the map. It was so cool, even though it's like a single player experience. And I do believe you could have another player join you, but I never ended up doing that. But just the storybook storytelling of a video game just felt so cool. Having like this narrator follow you throughout the story and communicate with you, it just had its own charm. And again, it was just something unlike the whole Fable series. It's just unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I'm excited, but I'm also nervous about the Fable 2 like reboot that they're doing. I am so excited for it, but I'm also very nervous because the original 3, really 1 and 2, for me it's 2 because that's really the only one I played, has a very specific style and sense of humor that it's going to be really hard to replicate that if you didn't work on it. Plus, like, times have changed, so I'm sure the humor is going to be different. So I am nervous to see if Fable is going to be just how it's going to be overall. So next, backing off of Oblivion, is Fallout 3. That game, to me, I just remember walking out of the vault for the first time and seeing, like Oblivion, just this huge, massive apocalyptic world where I think Fallout actually had more room to go do what you wanted to, because there were so many. I mean, I guess it's hard to say, but it wasn't a put together society like Oblivion was. So in Fallout, you truly felt like this world was yours to take over, versus like Oblivion having guards, and if you did something wrong, you would be wanted in certain cities. Whereas Fallout, you could just go on a rampage and kill whoever you wanted to. You could craft your own weapons, you could upgrade weapons, you could, and like the whole bottle cap system to me was really, really cool. Like it just had its own, it truly felt like its own universe. There was Nuka-Cola, the 1940s futuristic style, the nuclear style that it had, and just the choices that you could make, the upgrades, the charisma system, choosing different dialogues. To me, again, it was just a game that was never in a video game before, and I still don't think games nowadays do it as good as Fallout 3 did, as far as dialogue and choices and just being who you want to be in this world. Because I mean, you can play the game for 100 hours and there's plenty to do, and you made it through halfway through the story because you were off doing your own little adventure. So those are probably my 3 favorite RPGs ever that still hold a special place in my heart. And And I don't know if it's because I've just gotten older, so I've played just thousands of video games, and that might be why things are not as special to me anymore. But at that time, there was just something really special about being a kid and experiencing video games for the first time, especially if you're playing a certain genre for a first time, you know, like playing Oblivion for the first time and experiencing what an RPG really is. And you know, same thing with Dead Space, survival horror games, playing your first one of those. It's like the first games that got us into that genre. It almost feels like nothing ever comes close to those games. And I miss that feeling of discovery in a video game. But that leads me on to the next one. And I know this one is going to be so cliche, but I think this is a perfect transition because there is one game that has done that to me pretty recently. And that's, of course, the one, the only Red Dead Redemption 2. And there's a lot of people. It makes me so sad that there are people that just don't understand the appeal to Red Dead Redemption 2. They call it boring. But I think for me, like, I grew up with a grandpa that just absolutely loved Westerns because that's what he grew up with. And the fact that people say it's boring, but Red Dead Redemption 2, just the whole American West society and outlaws, it's just such a cool story to follow. And man, Rockstar just absolutely put their heart and soul into this game. And although Red Dead Redemption 2 is very linear as far as missions, meaning like you can't go off of the beaten path at all, but to me the whole point of that is I guess there really isn't the point, because there are some missions where you should be able to go off and do it a certain way. But despite that problem, because I know it's a problem, I hear about it all the time in my reading bad review video that I did for Red Dead Redemption 2. But it was just such the amount of detail that went into that game it's just like, I want that in every, I don't want it in every video game, but it's like, well, this was in Red Dead Redemption 2. Why is a game in 2024, you open up a cabinet and he just stands there and an inventory list pops up of things in that cabinet, rather than like opening it up, you can see the character Arthur Morgan pick up things and put them in the satchel. Like just those little added extra things. Whenever Arthur is facing a certain way and the sun's hitting him, you can like see the sun come through his ear. It's just, I know that sounds really silly and ridiculous, but they put so much time and effort into that game, and just the realism. There are things, again, that I wish you could do in Red Dead Redemption 2 that you can't do. Buy properties, but the clothing customization, getting your hair cut, your beard trimmed, the story, oh my goodness, man, this could have been Red Dead Redemption 2 could have been a TV show. That's how good the story is. And I think because I am a movie lover, I'm a TV show lover, and I'm really into film and just the process that goes into it, that this truly felt like I was following these characters through seasons. You know, like each chapter to me was like watching a series of a TV show. And again, I'm really big into cinematic gameplay, and I just love when cinematography blends together with audio design really well, with a beautiful just world to go and play around in. And that's what Red Dead Redemption 2 gave me. It had one of the saddest endings ever. And it truly is a game that, it is hard to go back into it because it is slower. It is very extensive. It's a very long game from start to finish, 50, 60 hours. But I wanted to add Red Dead Redemption 2 in there because, it is known as one of the greatest games to ever be created, and it's been made in the last 5 years. So is it 2018, 19? 5 to 10 years is when that game came out. But man, so good. And I have so many people that don't understand why I love it so much, but there's a reason it got Game of the Year. Well, did it get no, it didn't get Game of the Year. God of War got Game of the Year that year, but there's a reason it's known as one of the greatest games of all time. And man, it's just, So the next game I'm going to do is Call of Duty 2. And this may seem so weird to not pick like Call of Duty 4 or anything else, but to me, Call of Duty 2 had such a great story. And then that was the first time that I ever experienced anything online. Call of Duty 2 was the very first experience that I had. And I just remember being so blown away by it that you can pick all these. And back then, like, they didn't have kill streaks, they didn't have create a class. There was just like 3 or 4 classes you could choose from, handful of maps, a handful of game modes, and that was all that you had. That was it. There was no like extra DLC to play. There were no zombies. There was no war zone. And I have to mention this game because it truly opened my eyes to what the online world was like. And being able to talk to people over the Xbox 360 chat and the lobbies, and being able to not just only, I don't think they had chat at the time of the Xbox 360. I don't think party chat was out yet, but just being able to talk to people in a lobby, the whole thing was just bizarre to me. And to me, I remember going from like the PlayStation 2, Dreamcast, N64 era to the Xbox 360. And there's one thing about Call of Duty 2 that I remember, and it was the fact that you could read the serial number of the gun. Like it was the Thompson rifle. I just remember calling my dad down and being like, Dad, look at the gun. You can see the serial number on the back of a gun. These graphics are insane. And I didn't think it could get better than that. And then it, of course, got better than that as the years went on. But I was completely blown away by it. And then you had the really cool like D-Day World War II opening. Was that the open? No, you were I think it was the Russians that you opened with. But there was, of course, the D-Day mission. And man, it brings back so many incredible memories, because that game to me is what really truly started my love for online games. So surprisingly enough, I have to put Batman Arkham Asylum in that list. And I know that's considered, I think, the worst one or the second to worst one out of the 4 Arkham games. But at the time, I've never played a superhero game before. And I grew up just adoring Batman. Like, not that there were good movies back then, but I had all the action figures. I watched all the movies. I watched a little bit of the animated series, and I was Batman like 3 or 4 times as a kid for Halloween. And I almost forgot the Halloween part. I was not Batman as a kid, unfortunately, but I just remember putting that game in, and this is going to sound so stupid, but I actually fell asleep that night just looking at the game case, because it was really like my childhood completely just took over, and I got to play as my favorite character ever in a video game. And that was the first game, in my opinion, and again, that was my first superhero game, so I guess I really can't say much about that, but you truly felt like Batman playing Arkham Asylum for the first time ever. And just being able to swoop down and grab enemies and exploring Arkham Asylum in itself was so cool. And you, unfortunately, like, you got a little snippet of the Batmobile, you got the Batcave. Everything to me in that game was just, I was blown away by it. I remember staying up super late to play it. And I played it for like 3, 4, 5, and it doesn't sound like a long time, but I played it for 3 or 4 hours until like 2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I couldn't believe that a game like that existed. And I was able to play as the character that I just admired and looked up to. Not necessarily looked up to, but that I admired. And just, man, Batman is like one of the first characters in my life that I truly like adored and fell in love with. And just, again, being able to play as that character that you grew up watching blew me away. So the next one is going to be the last one, and it's actually a very special game to me, because this was really the final game that I played with my grandpa, and that is Destiny 1. And that wasn't the only reason, of course, but I had so many memories with my grandpa playing that game. And I played a little bit of Destiny 2 with him, but that slowly faded very quickly for Destiny 2, just because he's gotten, of course, getting older and older and older. He had less reflexes, his eyesight wasn't the best, so I don't think he really even plays video games anymore. That was truly the first game that I played that had that good of a loot system. And then you of course have, the experience with friends and family, and just playing through this game through a story with 2 other people. And of course you can make 3 different characters, so you could play it each time with a different group of people, or of course play with the same people. But just, man, it had just such a good positive vibe, like inspiring light vibe about it. Of course, the light, the darkness. And going back and playing it recently truly just made me realize why that game was so special, and the fact that you can go back and play it and still start back from the beginning, which Destiny 2 does not let you do that, and it pisses me off. But it was such an easy game even now to go back and follow, because they classify it, they simplify all the DLC and the story, so it's really easy to follow. You know what missions go with what DLC, but it still combined everything in such a beautiful way. And Destiny will always go down as probably one of my most played games of all time, the first one. And I just had so many good memories with it, with friends, and I made a lot of friends with it. I during that process, it was like because at that time I was 2 years out of high school, so it was also one of the last times I played with a lot of my friends before we all went off and became adults and got full-time jobs after college, or we went off to college and just kind of went our separate ways. So every game that I've said so far, I think just has some sort of nostalgic attachment to it. And Destiny is definitely one of those games now that it's 10 years old, which is just so crazy to think about. And it was also really big to me because I never really played Halo growing up. I didn't have an original Xbox. I didn't get into the series until Halo 3. Loved Halo 3, hated Halo 4, didn't play Halo 5. Played Halo Infinite for like an hour. I did not like the story. It didn't grab me as much as Halo 3 did. So it was also like, when Destiny came along, I almost felt like I was replaying the story of whenever Halo 1 first came out, and like, that whole wave of gamers hopped onto Halo and it became this huge big hit. I kind of felt like I was reminiscing and taking part into something that I missed the first time around, because of course the creators of Halo went off, made their own company, or they didn't make their own company, but they kind of left Microsoft and they went off to be Bungie, who created Destiny. And I feel like I was able to pick back up on this new franchise, on this new series, this new game that came out that I missed the first time around with Halo. So I truly felt like playing that game, that I was a part of something that was going to be really, really big. And of course it did become big. I don't know, man. Destiny may have became Halo big at some point. Destiny was a massive game. And then the beginning and the middle of Destiny 2 was really good. And then it just became way too much and confusing. And they made a lot of weird changes. But Destiny 1 will for sure go down as one of my favorite games of all time. Just, again, not even just because of the game itself, but because of the memories I made when playing it. But all right, that's it. I'm sure my list is probably going to change. There are so many. It's such a hard list to make because there are so many incredible games out there that I wish I could have named, but I didn't. Things that come to mind really quickly without really explaining it are games like Mass Effect 2 is a big one for me. I really did enjoy also like Titanfall 2. The story to me was really cool. That was like one of the best moves. Like the movement felt so good in that game. And there's like Assassin's Creed 1, Assassin's Creed 2. I'm actually going through a list right here just to kind of see what games truly grabbed my attention growing up. And like San Andreas, of course, I played around with it. I never really played through the story, but Call of Duty 4 was another one. World at War I loved. Arkham City, of course, was really great. Uncharted series, which I didn't get into PlayStation 3 until later on in the cycle, so I kind of missed the releases of those games until the re-release of 1, 2, and 3 came out. But all of these, man, like there's just so many games that I could sit here and list, but those 9 are definitely the ones that kind of defined me as a person and as a gamer. And to this day, they all still hold a very special place in my heart. But all right, that is going to be the end of this video. Thank you guys for letting me ramble and just talk about video games for however long I've been talking. But thank you guys so much. I appreciate all of you. Peace out, and I will catch you on the next one.